Hello, Iona College. This is your host with the most, Jersey Joe, and the Sports Vault is back. And unfortunately, this segment is all devoted to hockey, and it's some tough stuff to talk about. Unfortunate for the U.S. in both regards. But we'll start it off with the U.S. women's game last night, losing in the gold medal round 3-2 in overtime to Canada. They played a really good game, but they were up 2-0 with 3 minutes left. Team Canada pulled their goalie with about 1 minute and 35 seconds left, and just losing that way, it's just so tough. The U.S. cleared the puck at a point, and Canada had the empty net, and it was literally, it couldn't have been any inches closer to actually going in. So that was really tough to see. That one play would have ended the game there. But Team Canada, you got to give the women's team for them credit. They never gave up. A lot of teams probably would have given up in that situation, but Team Canada kept on going and they prevailed. And the thing that drives you crazy too is in the overtime for the women. The U.S. got some good shots on net at the beginning of the overtime. Until about 15 minutes into the overtime, they were getting good shots on net. So it was pretty tough to see them losing that way. But it's just the big news that just literally happened seconds ago. U.S. losing the game to Canada 1-0. Carey Price was in goal for Canada, which I thought might have happened since Carey Price started that last game. Team Canada said that they might not, because they pulled a Luongo from the last game, and Carey Price was in that one as well. So kind of surprised on that, but overall, just kind of disappointing for me because I think we all felt that if this was probably Team USA's best chance to get this win against Canada, but now as it sets up, since Sweden won the game this morning against Finland, they won 2-1, they're going to move into the gold medal round against Canada. Canada and Sweden's played very well. Give Sweden a lot of credit, but Canada and Sweden, I think it's going to be Canada's for the taking. I think they've got the gold medal again. And like I was saying before, there's no shame in losing to Canada. If it was a team like when the U.S. loses to Russia, it's tough to lose to Russia with our histories and things. We don't get along too well. Things are better now, but it's tough to lose to a team like that. But to Canada, with a sport that, hockey is everything to them, it's a little bit easier to take, but still disappointing that the U.S. lost this game, especially 1-0. Jonathan Quick gave up that one goal, but other than that, I thought he was pretty good. Like I was saying before we went to break, I just thought the intensity from Team Canada was a lot better. From the U.S. point on the power plays, just didn't see enough intensity from them. They just weren't shooting enough at goal. So it was a close game, tough game to lose. But overall, that's my take. And before we were going to do this, I was going to say how's the John Tavares injury going to affect the game. But obviously it didn't affect it too much because the game is over now. But especially for the Islanders, John Tavares, the injury, torn MCL and torn meniscus, that's tough to take. The Islanders, though, it's just been a brutal season for the Islanders overall. 22-30, they're last in the Metropolitan Conference. It's really been disappointing. I had high hopes for the Islanders going into the season, especially after they made the playoffs last year, and they gave the Penguins a little run. Look, the Penguins were a lot better than they were last season, but I think the Islanders, they played pretty well in that series, for what it was worth. But as if things couldn't get worse, though. Tavares getting hurt, that's just tough to take. It really is. Rob, you have the stats for Tavares, don't you?
Yeah. This year, Joe, 24 goals, 42 assists. That's hard to lose for this Islanders team, especially this guy helped lead you to the playoffs in that lockout season last year. And you know what? This is really going to kill. Now the Islanders are going to have to rebuild again, probably going to get another top draft pick, but this is a real loss, especially for this team. I had high hopes just like you, Joe, with the Islanders. I thought they'd be another playoff team, maybe an 8th seed. All these years, Joe, the Islanders always seem to struggle, but they never seem to get back together to what they were like last year. But I don't get this Islanders team whatsoever.
Yeah, it's tough. I think the big thing for the Islanders is they definitely need to get a goalie. If they get a goalie and then they get Tavares rested up and healthy for next season, I think that's going to be the big thing that they need to do. But that's it for the hockey segment. And now that we move on, some football stuff. The big thing this weekend is you're going to be hearing all the combine stuff. You've been seeing it already, all the combine stuff, and we've got you covered when it comes to that. So the big names that we're going to be watching out for and that you should probably be watching out for too this weekend. Obviously, the first one is Jadeveon Clowney, and he's been a pretty big discussion during the week. Steve Spurrier was saying His work ethic is good. It's not great like Melvin Ingram or Marcus Lattimore and some guys. And I mean, that's not exactly the most encouraging advice, but I think a lot of people, I think Clown is going to be one of those guys where he's just going to awe us in the combine. I mean, his measurements, his speed and things like that for a guy of his size are going to mesmerize us. And I think that's going to justify a team taking him earlier than they should. He's going to be a top 10 pick, but I think if you're a team that needs a quarterback, you can't, even though everybody admits this guy's one of the is like a can't miss guy, a game changer, I just, on the defensive end, if you're a team with a quarterback, I just don't think you could take a guy like Clowney. I think if you need a quarterback, Clowney's not going to win you games. A quarterback will. Even if you miss on the quarterback you take, at least that quarterback will have a bigger difference. I mean, Clowney's not going to win you a Super Bowl. I just don't think that if you're a team with a quarterback, like Houston, it seems like Houston's kind of toying with taking him, but if you're Houston, I think you've got to take a quarterback. Rob, what are your thoughts on Clowney?
I just hope he really steps it up, Joe. You know, this year I really had high hopes for him for his senior year. He blames the injuries, which I don't believe he was injured, really. I don't think his injury was that serious, that he had a bad year. But I see him as a good draft pick. But I hope he really steps it up, really mans up to show that he wants to be this top pick in the NFL, because I think he'll be great. You know, after we saw on New Year's Eve last year with that hit against Michigan, you know, you can only hope that this guy really steps it up big time come the NFL.
Absolutely good points there. But on the quarterback front, there's a lot of debate on which one is the best in this class. There's, you know, you have Manziel, you have Teddy Bridgewater. Blake Bortles is one of the ones, I mean, he's gotten so much momentum since his name came into this conversation. For me, though, I mean, there was a lot made this morning of the hand measurement of Teddy Bridgewater. I heard Bill Polian say that the hand size was very concerning to him, but I think from watching all these guys this season, I think Teddy throws the ball the best. I think his accuracy is definitely the best out of all these guys. Doesn't have the biggest arm compared to a guy like Manziel, but I think Teddy is... he's not as much of a risk taker as Manziel. He'll move the ball. He kind of reminds me of Alex Smith. He's very methodical with the ball, slowly moves the ball down the field. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but he's gonna have enough. So I think Teddy is probably my safest quarterback out of these guys. I think Manziel has the biggest upside out of them, but Manziel also has a lot of things you got to worry about with him. I mean, the size is definitely a concern. I don't think as big a concern as some people are saying, but I heard some people like Polian say best, he reminds them of Doug Flutie more than some people like Drew Brees and Russell Wilson. I mean, there's been a lot of good points about those things, but his maturity has been a big concern for a lot of people. I just don't know about Johnny Manziel. I mean, if you're a team who needs a quarterback, I think you've got to roll the dice. Like we say on the show all the time, I mean, you just got to keep drafting that quarterback until you can find that one, and then you just got to keep on hoping. But I think Manziel, between him, Bortles, and Bridgewater, I think Bridgewater is probably my safest bet out of those guys. And then you've got some guys who kind of haven't gotten a lot of attention, like from out of Clemson, Tajh Boyd. I think Boyd's good too, but I just don't know if his game's going to translate to the pro level. So for me, Bridgewater from seeing is probably the safest. But the thing again with Bridgewater that I keep going back to is hasn't really played against a lot of top tier competition. I mean, Johnny Manziel played against a lot of good defenses in Alabama, but probably the best NFL pro defense he played was LSU, and those were arguably his two worst games as a collegiate athlete. So that could tell you something there too. So there's a lot of quarterbacks in this class. I mean, you've got to take one if you need one, but it's just there's a lot to go into evaluating each one and which fit is best. But Rob, who's your safest? Who's the best quarterback according to you?
I really like Johnny Football, Joe. And my reason for Johnny Football, after I watched that Duke game, I think he showed really how great of a quarterback he is. But the real thing with him is, are you going to have that childish Manziel mentality where he comes in, he just acts like the kid like he did in college? Or are you going to have the more adult kind of Johnny Manziel? Because the more kind of adult Johnny Manziel will be the future of your quarterback and will show you how good he could be. But I think Johnny Manziel could be a great quarterback. You know, everybody talks about how size is a big thing, but Russell Wilson's a small quarterback. I think Johnny Manziel would be a great fit in the NFL, though, as a top pick.
I mean, he's going to be, the last couple of years, it's been like there's been a one guy who's been the face, and Manziel's the face of this one. I mean, everybody's going to be looking to see where he goes. We'll see what happens with him. On the offensive line side, look, a lot of people don't pay as much attention to the offensive line, but it's a big piece of a football team that you really need to build. And there's a guy named Greg Robinson out of Auburn. He's an offensive lineman. Jake Matthews. They're probably going to be top 10 picks. Greg Robinson is unbelievable. If you watch Auburn this year, which I'm sure a lot of people did, they were in the championship game. They run the ball 95% of the time. I mean, the gaps that Auburn creates out of their offensive line is unbelievable. I mean, their quarterback Nick Marshall really can't throw the ball that well, but they run the ball so effectively. And you think for a team like Alabama, who they played against, a team like Missouri with a big defensive lines, the SEC has huge defensive lines, and Auburn was always able to create those spaces for their running offense. I mean, when you run the ball 90% of the time, it's pretty easy to game plan and stop that, but no one stopped Auburn's running game all year, not even Alabama, not the big T defenses, so it's really impressive. Greg Robinson is a big part of the reason why Auburn had so much success. I think this guy is going to be a fantastic offensive lineman in the NFL. But like I said, they don't get all the credit, the offensive linemen, but this guy's going to be a good player. And same thing with Jake Matthews. I mean, you got to get those offensive line pieces. You can't let your offensive line erode, so they're going to get some looks. The running back side is what's interesting, is because there's some interesting running backs in this draft, but as we've seen in the last couple of years, running backs just don't carry the weight that they used to. They just don't affect the game as much, and I don't think you're going to see teams taking them as high as they did. So the big ones that I'm interested in, one of them is DeAnthony Thomas. I mean, he has great speed. He's a lot like LaMichael James, if you remember him from Oregon a couple seasons ago. But the problems I have with him is durability. I mean, he's had some durability issues in college. I just don't know if I think he's got to bulk up to get into the NFL. I mean, he's definitely a little bit too slim now. I think he's got to put on some muscle, but the speed is there. I could see him maybe as a kick returner or something, but I'm curious to see what team takes a chance on DeAnthony Thomas. After that, you have Carlos Hyde at Ohio State. Now, some teams might be a little bit cautious with him. He does have a few red flags for his in his pass so far, so that might scare a few teams off of him. But I think he's a big running back. I mean, this guy's got, you just put him up the middle, put his head down, he's just going to run over you. So he's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. And the next one is Trey Mason. I mean, Trey Mason, the thing is, he really took a lot of hits this year. I mean, in Auburn, I mean, they ran the ball literally not. I keep saying, like 90% of the time of their. So he got a lot of hits on him this season. But I like Trey Mason, and I'll be curious to see what happens to him on draft day. Other than that, though, but receiver wise, team like Big Shot Rob's Jets need a receiver bad, and it seems like right now the two best hands down are Sammy Watkins and Mike Evans. For me, though, I mean, everybody likes Sammy Watkins. I think he's a great wide receiver as well, but I love Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans is fantastic. Out of Texas A&M, you saw that probably his coming out party was against Alabama. Manziel and him were just unbelievable. I mean, Johnny Knox is a big receiver, huge arms. I mean, he could make the play, leaping ability. His vertical is unbelievable. I think if you're a team like the Jets, or maybe you're a team like the Detroit Lions, and you desperately need a receiver or something like that, I don't think you can miss on a guy like Mike Evans. Mike Evans or Sammy Watkins, but Mike Evans, I mean, I've watched a lot more of him than Sammy Watkins, and I love this guy, Mike Evans. I think he's phenomenal. But Rob, if you had a choice between Mike Evans and Sammy Watkins, which one would you take if you were drafting today?
I would choose Evans. I feel he really broke out this year with Johnny Manziel, and that's something the Jets really need. You know, last year you thought the Jets were going to get a wide receiver in the draft, but the Rams traded up, got that pick. And now this year they really need a guy like Evans because they really need to boost up that wide receiver position, especially if they release Antonio Holmes.
Agree. I mean, and I think this is a good point for a lot of teams. I think, like, look at the Dolphins last year. They went out and they spent all that money on Mike Wallace, and it really didn't pay off. I think if you're a team nowadays, I'd rather draft a guy than go out in free agency and spend a lot. Like Eric Decker, somebody's going to pay him a lot of money. You're probably going to get Hakeem Nicks, somebody's going to pay him a lot of money, and sometimes it works, but I think a lot of times I'd rather draft a young guy, put him into my system, because you see a lot of times like Mike Wallace with the Dolphins, these guys come from different systems. It takes them a long time to get adjusted. The quarterback sometimes, Ryan Tannehill in Miami, Hartline is his guy. They're still working out the kinks with him and Mike Wallace, so I'm not really sure. If I'm a team, I definitely want to draft my receiver before going out and spending a lot on free agency. I want to save my money for putting some nice pieces on defense, so draft them young. These two guys are definitely going to make an impact in the league, though. But like I said, this weekend, you're going to be seeing all the combine stuff on ESPN, NFL Network. It's going to be unbelievable. You're going to see all that stuff. But those are the big names that you should definitely look out for. We're going to have a lot more coverage of the NFL going into the draft, but this was kind of just the preliminary stage for the combine, setting you up, telling you what you need to know. And now that we're going to move along in the NFL segment, and the big news that coming out of the other day, since all the coaches are in Indianapolis for the combine, is Joe Philbin. And after the Incognito and Martin situation, the Ted Wells report, the findings in it, we kind of wanted to hear from Joe Philbin about what he had to say about all this, and he says it's on him to create a better environment, and this is coming after they fired their offensive line coach Jim Turner and their athletic trainer Kevin O'Neill. But I'm going to let you take this first, Rob, because I have a lot to say on this, but I want to hear what you have to say. So why don't you tell us, what are your thoughts? A lot of people said Philbin should have been fired. Where do you stand on this?
I don't think he should be fired, but all I had to say for this situation is how blind can you be to not see this in your locker room? Like, this has been going on for so many games in your locker room this season, and you really didn't check up whatsoever on your playoffs, which is a big thing for Philbin. Yes, he should have taken better care for this situation. I don't think he should have been fired, but I think he should have taken better care of his players in this situation and fix things up, and then the offensive line would have no problem together.
Agreed there. The thing for me, though, is, I think Philbin and his staff should have been fired. And then my reasoning behind it is, there's no way you can convince me that an NFL head coach had no idea that this was going on. NFL head coaches, I was listening to Lovie Smith the other day, and he said about the opposite of everything Philbin was saying. He likes to be nosy. He wants to know everything that's going on. I just don't see how you could be an NFL head coach and have no idea that this was going on. It kind of takes me back to the bounty scandal a couple of years ago when Sean Payton was suspended the entire season, and of course he said he didn't know what was going on. But if you're a head coach, you have to know what's going on, every phase of your team, every element of your team, the morale of the locker room, what's going on. There's no excuses not to know. You're just not in charge of the X and O's, the execution of the game plan. You're in charge of the well-being of the players. And I just think that Joe Philbin, I just don't feel comfortable bringing a guy back who was so oblivious. Let's say he was that oblivious. I still don't see why you would want to bring back a guy who was this oblivious to something this bad going on. This wasn't just Incognito. This was Pouncey as well, another player. So this was bad stuff going on, and it's just unexcusable. I just don't feel comfortable bringing him back. And part of me also thinks, what does this say about the Dolphins players that they allowed this to happen? We agree that there's not a lot of leadership on this team, but I just don't. It shows a low character of the Miami Dolphins locker room. That one person, not one person could step up and just change the situation. And the fact that Incognito was voted to Leadership Council enough is just embarrassing. That Dolphins locker room it really is embarrassing that this whole thing transpired. Not one player, like I said, not one player could make this thing be fixable. So that's tough to swallow, but that's what me and Big Shot Rob, one of our rare disagreements, he is landing on him. He should stay, and I think he should be fired. But before we cap off this NFL segment, we have one more thing, and it's just one of those questions, Colin Cowherd of The Herd on ESPN Radio, one of our favorite people to listen to on this show, he says it all the time. The NBA has kind of had this reputation for having the dirty guys, the guys who are always getting in trouble with the law, but it really isn't. If you look at the NBA, the NFL, and the NHL, the MLB just has cheaters, not really guys who break the law, but there's cheaters. But in the NFL, it seems like there's so many more players compared to the other major sports who are getting in trouble with the law, and especially after the Ray Rice things that are coming out. Look, this is bad, the Ray Rice stuff. It really is. He's so big in the community around here and things like that, but the more I think that we find out about this, it looks really bad. So far, I'm sure a lot of you saw the video on TMZ of the elevator scenario, and every way you look at that, I just don't see how you could possibly defend it. I mean, he's kind of moving his supposed fiance around like he's a hunter, and he just picked her up out of the woods and is dragging her to his car. I mean, it really looks ugly, and apparently there are reports now that there is a video of him actually striking his fiance. So I don't know if that's going to leak, especially with, I'm sure with TMZ and Deadspin, somebody's going to get a hands on that video, and it's a bad situation right now for Ray Rice. It really is. But my bigger thing is, Rob, maybe you can fill in on this. Why does the NFL do you feel the NFL has a problem with players getting in trouble? Is it a problem?
Yeah, it's been happening a lot lately. Like how many drunken bar fights players are getting into. People like Pac-Man Jones, Joe, who are always getting in trouble in their careers. And it makes you wonder, though, with this situation. With all that money you make, how could you always be getting into trouble? We've had players like Darren Sharper with what's going on with him right now, with his rape case. And it's like, all that money you guys make and you just can't stay out of trouble. I really don't get it, Joe, in this league. I don't understand why so many players get into this trouble.
I mean, here's a weird thing. You think the NFL for a lot of these guys is like, it's an escape route. I mean, their whole lives they've been in these bad environments with things like this happen, and football is kind of their escape. They get the money. They don't need to live this lifestyle anymore or be around this type of things. And a lot of guys still can. I mean, it's of course not saying the entire league. Of course not. There's a lot of good guys who don't do any of this stuff, but there is a lot of bad. And the thing about Ray Rice that's disappointing, I'm sure, especially for the New Rochelle community is, I mean, this guy's had a pretty good track record to this point. He's done a lot of good charity things. I mean, to this point, he's really never had this type of anything black stains on his mark, but I mean, this is just bad. It really is bad, the more stuff that's going to come out of this, but that's our little take on that. That's going to cap off this segment. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit of baseball. Then the last segment we're talking a little bit of everything, so stay with us, and we will be right back.